Chapter 12:10. A kind of unexpected emotion spread in Dongqing Wudi's heart. Li Huaqing came. Why did he come here? What was he doing here? This seemingly abrupt action of the other party suddenly showed an unusual flavor. Dongqing Wudi was a little confused and instinctively vigilant. I talked to him not long ago. After that, I set off here as soon as possible. Dongqing Wudi looked at Li Tianlan. Under normal circumstances, he should be waiting for my news in the Hidden Dragon Sea. He came here at this time. He came with bad intentions? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. It's hard to say. It's not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. Dongqing Wudi shook his head. I understand. It mainly depends on how I deal with Li Kuangtu, right? Li Tianlan flicked his fingers gently, and the burning cigarette between his fingers flew out. The sword energy surged, and the cigarette was directly smashed into the finest powder. A flame floated in front of him for a moment and then went out. He really cares about the purgatory of Heaven Capital and Li Kuangtu. Is he so impatient? Li Tianlan's tone was mocking. Maybe he was stimulated by the divine list ranking. Dongqing Wudi's voice was a little irritated. Everything seemed to be getting out of control. Li Huaqing couldn't wait to rush to Xinyuan City. Not to mention anything else, at least it was certain that Li Huaqing's inner thoughts had changed without anyone knowing. What Li Tianlan said was actually right. Li Huaqing came here with bad intentions. On the contrary, the uncertainty of what he said was not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing was a kind of self-comfort. Li Tianlan was not a fool, and neither was Dongqing Wudi. Both of them knew very well what it meant for Li Huaqing to come to Xinyuan City at this time, before he heard from Dongqing Wudi and before he was sure of Li Tianlan's attitude. It couldn't be a good thing. The sense of oppression brought by the personal arrival of the president of Zhongzhou State had crushed over half of the territory of Zhongzhou State at the moment the news came. In an irresistible gesture, it completely crushed the last leeway between Emperor Dong's palace and the parliament. This was the strength that Li Huaqing rarely showed. The personal arrival of the president was completely different from the arrival of Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi could represent the parliament of Zhongzhou State. He could use any identity to talk to Li Tianlan about Li Kuangtu. If it went well, everyone would be happy. Even if it went badly, it didn't matter. Dongqing Wudi couldn't do it. Next time, Wu Jingmin could do it. If Wu Jingmin couldn't come to an agreement, then Zhou Mulin would come over. Even Zhou Yunhai and Guo Wenian could come to talk to him one by one, confirm Li Tianlan's attitude in the negotiations, and then give him one bargaining chip after another. This is a stalemate process. This was a necessary seesaw process. Many negotiations required probing over and over again. As long as Li Huaqing was different, there would still be room for negotiation. Under normal circumstances, when the negotiation was almost done, Li Huaqing would participate in the last negotiation and make the final decision before taking Li Kuangtu away. It might take a long time, but it wouldn't drag on until after the election. But now, everything in this plan, everything that would have happened under normal circumstances, was skipped over. Li Huaqing did not wait. As the president of Zhongzhou State, he was leading the entire power of Zhongzhou State from Yuzhou to Tianan. There was no room for negotiation. He was extremely tough. Everyone knew that when Li Huaqing came to Tianan and left Xinyuan City, there would only be two results. Either Zhongzhou State would take Li Kuangtu away, or Zhongzhou State would destroy Emperor Dong's palace. It was impossible for the second result to happen. The prestige of the president of Zhongzhou State could not be consumed in the endless tug-of-war and negotiations. As long as he came, Li Tianlan would have to give him a result in the shortest time. I'm here. If I can't take him away, I'll kill you. How overbearing was this? Dongqing Wudi's face was livid. He held his mobile phone and seemed to be hesitating whether to call Li Huaqing to sound him out. He had a natural position, so if he called him, Emperor Dong's palace would inevitably be suspected of showing weakness. Li Huaqing had never communicated with Dongqing Wudi from beginning to end. Perhaps he, who was on the plane at this time, was waiting for Dongqing Wudi's call. As long as this call was made, he would know that Emperor Dong's palace was not confident. Let him come. Li Tianlan's essence, qi, and spirit seemed to completely condense in a very short silence. His voice revealed a kind of killing determination that could tear the world apart, and it was as hard as gold and iron. "I'll wait here." "Why do you have to do this?" Dongqing Wudi frowned tightly and held his mobile phone, but he couldn't make the call. "Maybe there is another way." "There is indeed another way." Li Tianlan nodded. "But I don't accept it." His expression and voice were getting calmer and calmer, almost deep. "As long as I leave Emperor Dong's palace at this time, Li Huaqing can't do anything." Li Tianlan looked up at the night in the distance and said indifferently, "But this is my territory. Why should I leave?" Dongqing Wudi walked up to Li Tianlan. In his sight he saw a trace of extremely fine but shocking scarlet blood in Li Tianlan's pupils. The wind swept through the night. The sword energy between heaven and earth was like a tide, mighty and mighty. The incomparably strong and even fierce fighting aura surged in Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan's calm voice became a little hoarse, as if he was trying to suppress something. "How dare he? Even if I dare to see him, I dare." "Tianlan." Dongqing Wudi frowned. Li Tianlan didn't continue to speak out his rebellious thoughts in the eyes of others. He stopped speaking and seemed to calm down for a moment. The phone rang again. Dongqing Wudi took a deep look at Li Tianlan, picked up the phone, and said in a deep voice, "Qingzhao. Are you in Xianyuan City?" Bai Qingzhao's voice on the other end of the phone was hurried and anxious. Dongqing Wudi said yes. "I heard that Li Huaqing saw you not long ago. Do you know that he has gone to Xianyuan City now? What is he doing? What does he want to do? Is he forcing us to take a stand? Or is he forcing Tianlan to take a stand?" Bai Qingzhao's exasperated voice sounded on the other end of the phone, sounding sharp and high-pitched. Now the whole upper class of Zhongzhou State knew that Li Guangtu had fallen into Li Tianlan's hands. Everyone knew Li Huaqing's attitude toward Li Guangtu. Everyone also knew that Dongqing Wudi was already in Xianyuan City. At this time, Li Huaqing suddenly rushed to Xianyuan City in person, which had imperceptibly made everyone in the whole parliament tense up, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. At this moment, with Yuzhou as the center, the suffocating sense of oppression was spreading over the whole Zhongzhou state as Li Huaqing approached. Every member of parliament was paying close attention to the development of the incident at this time. "Qingzhao, don't worry. We'll deal with it when it comes," Dongqing Wudi said in a deep voice. "Maybe there is another possibility." Bai Qingzhao fell silent for a while. After a full 5 minutes, he said slowly, "Is it possible?" Of course, there was another possibility. That was, in the few hours after Li Huaqing and Dongqing Wudi parted, Li Huaqing had a new bargaining chip that could persuade Li Tianlan. And he was extremely confident in his bargaining chip. He was so confident that as long as he proposed it, Li Tianlan would never refuse. But was it possible? In just a few hours, a certain decision couldn't even be considered as careful consideration. And Li Huaqing had never been an impulsive person. The phone rang faintly in the phone. It seemed that Bai Qingzhao's phone rang again. Bai Qingzhao hesitated for a moment, but he did not hang up the phone. Instead, he answered the phone with the other hand. Through the phone, a somewhat hurried and vague voice rang in Bai Qingzhao's ears and echoed in Dongqing Wudi's ears like thunder. Vaguely, the voice with a slight Qingzhou accent on the phone sounded familiar. It seemed to be the voice of a heavyweight in the supervisory department. "Qingzhao, the third supervisory group has entered Xianxia." Chapter 12:11. It was a surprise. It was a surprise. On the other end of the phone, the voice that was separated by 2 communication signals rang in Bai Qingzhao's ears, Dongqing Wudi's ears, and also fell into Li Tianlan's ears. The third supervisory group entered Xianxia. It was hard to describe what he felt at this moment. It was as if a kind of extreme numbness and coldness rose in his body, along the spine, and hit the brain in an instant. All the pores on his body opened, and his hair stood on end. He didn't know whether it was anger or panic mixed together. His blood flowed wildly in his body, and the excited emotion roared to the high ground of reason. Dongqing Wudi clenched his teeth, and his eyes were bloodshot. A thought kept roaring in his mind. How dare he? What did he want to do? The supervisory system of Xianxia state had lasted for hundreds of years. It could be said that it was a group of people that could make any feudal official or feudal lord feel as if they were facing a formidable enemy. The members of the supervisory group were not fixed, the time of supervision was not fixed, and the scope of supervision was not fixed. Under normal circumstances, the inspection team would only decide on the scope of inspection at the last minute if there was a major case that caught the attention of the parliament. Otherwise, although there was a fixed premise, the inspection team would usually give a routine notice before the operation after being authorized. There were very few cases of sudden attacks. As for the leader of the supervisory group and the scope of supervision, this kind of authorization was only in the hands of the president. And today, right now, when the new ranking list of the divine list swept the entire dark world, when Li Guangtu was captured by Li Tianlan, and when Li Huaqing decided to ask Emperor Dong's palace for people, the third supervisory group determined its scope of supervision and inspection. Xianxia. At present, Xianxia had not received the notice at all. There was no doubt that this was Li Huaqing's sudden attack. When the sense of oppression from the hidden dragon sea crossed thousands of miles and covered Tianan, the parliament's edge had directly shrouded Xianxia. The third supervisory group went to Xianxia. Li Huaqing drew his sword. Dongxing Wudi kept taking deep breaths several times. The feeling of numbness in his scalp was still there, but his eyes had completely calmed down. He didn't know whether this scene was a game or something else, but he saw Li Huaqing's toughness and Li Tianlan's uncompromising attitude. The whole Xianxia state seemed to be full of sabers and swords. The fierceness and bloodiness of the battle seemed to be assaulting their senses. Dongxing Wudi held the phone tightly and said lightly, "Who is the leader of the supervisory group?" Wang Wei's team leader, Tong Yang's vice team leader. On the other end of the phone, it seemed that he didn't expect Dongxing Wudi to answer. After a pause, he slowly spoke. Dongxing Wudi narrowed his eyes and remained silent. At this time, the person who was communicating with Bai Qingzhao was one of the backbone forces of the giant group, as well as the representative of all the forces of the giant group in the Ministry of Supervision. The fact that he could get the intelligence so accurately was enough to show his power in the Ministry of Supervision. Bai Qingzhao said something to the other party on the other side of the phone and then hung up. Bai Qingzhao was not angry. He seemed to have calmed down as well. He said quietly, "Should we do something?" "Of course. It's not our style to do nothing when they're already knocking on our door." Dongxing Wudi twitched the corner of his mouth and sneered. Wang Wei, Tong Yang. They were the current leader and deputy leader of the third inspectorate group. Wang Wei was the former governor of Liaodong. He retired 2 years ago, but he had great prestige in the academics. Tong Yang was an inspector at the level of deputy governor of the Ministry of Supervision and was also one of the backbone forces of the academics. These two people served as the first and second leaders of the third inspectorate group. Obviously, Li Huaqing had made up his mind to monopolize the results of the inspectorate group's inspection of Xianxia. What was Xianxia? Not only the parliament, but all the people in Xianxia state who knew that the new group was about to rise knew very well that Xianxia was the core base camp of the new group. The new group had only risen for a short time, so the talent reserve was inevitably insufficient. Many of the territories that the new group conquered needed to be replaced by people from Xianxia. At present, Speaker Ji Ankong of Xianxia, Governor Dongxing Qiuqi, and even 5 or 6 provincial councillors of Xianxia could be said to be popular figures after the election, especially Ji Ankong, who was the first secretary of Wu Jingmin, the current deputy prime minister of Xianxia state. He was a super capable man promoted by Wu Jingmin. After Zhou Yuanshan was transferred to Nanyue, he had been the speaker for just over 2 years, but now he had become the main figure promoted by the new group. After the election, he was very likely to enter the parliament. If Li Tianlan could push him into the parliament, then the new group's layout in Xianxia state would be easier and more powerful. Headed by Ji Ankong, Dongcheng Qiuqi, 5 or 6 provincial councillors of Jiangxia province, and even the first and second leaders of the local municipal governments were now people of concern. This was the power that the Li family had suppressed and accumulated for many years. They were the elites of the elites. Almost everyone had the ability to take on greater responsibilities. Whether they could go up a step and what position they could reach depended on the explosive power of the new group in the period before the election. This battle array could directly determine the scale and foundation of the new group. At this time, Li Huaqing let the third supervisory group enter Xianxia. There was no doubt that it was a drastic measure. This knife stabbed straight at Li Tianlan and the key points of the whole new group. Even if the supervisory group was nitpicking and found a little problem, Li Huaqing would have the possibility to completely magnify it. This could completely affect the explosive power of the new group at the last moment, completely suppress their future scale and the right to speak in Zhongzhou state. What the hell happened? When the list of the divine list came out, Dongqing Wudi originally thought that Li Huaqing would further increase his bargaining chip, but he did not expect that what he waited for was Li Huaqing's almost reckless suppression. What happened on Earth did not seem to matter anymore. What mattered was what he should do after Li Tianlan showed his attitude. Was this kind of suppression a warning to the giant group? A warning to Dongqing Wudi not to interfere in the affairs of the new group? Did he want to isolate Li Tianlan and the new group and make them feel more pressure? Dongqing Wudi sneered. After hanging up the phone with Bai Qingzhao, he quickly found Bai Qingxian's phone number and dialed it. At the same time in Yuzhou. After hanging up the phone, Bai Qingzhao walked out of the study and saw Bai Zhanfang sitting silently in the living room, drinking tea. What did Wudi say? Bai Zhanfang glanced at him and took the initiative to ask. He said that if we do nothing when others have come to fight, it's not our style. Bai Zhanfang said honestly. Bai Zhanfang was silent for a while, as if he was thinking about something carefully. After a while, he suddenly laughed and said, "In that case, let's do something." Bai Qingzhao was shocked, and the blood all over his body seemed to be completely boiling with his father's words. He took a deep breath, clenched his fists tightly and tentatively said, "Then, shall we wait for the signal from Liaodong?" Waiting for the signal from Liaodong was undoubtedly the best way to fight back against the third supervisory group. Bai Zhanfang smiled indifferently and said, "There's no need to be so troublesome. We old guys are still here. Why let the younger generation do it?" He lowered his eyelids and said lightly, "Your Uncle Zhou is already on his way." Chapter 12:12. When the melodious ringtone of the mobile phone rang again in the roaring rotors, Li Huaqing looked down at the mobile phone. The light on the mobile phone screen had dimmed slightly. The upper right corner of the screen showed that his mobile phone still had 17% battery. The beautiful land and rivers of Zhongzhou state were moving backward unhurriedly under the helicopter. Li Huaqing's eyes lit up for a moment, but the glimmer of light dimmed again when he saw the caller ID on the screen. His mobile phone kept ringing. Since he got on the helicopter, his mobile phone had been ringing. The strong wind brought by the helicopter whistled through the entire Zhongzhou state in the night. He went all the way south, leaving Yuzhou with an absolute sense of oppression, passing through Yan and Zhao, Zhongyuan, North Lake and South Lake, and entering Xia. After replenishing in Xia, he rushed to Nanyun, Tianan, Xinyuan City, and Emperor Dong's palace. No one saw Li Huaqing's hesitation. Countless backbone of the academics, retired old people, and then Hua Jinyang, Zhou Yunhai, Ji Wenzhang, Wan Qingyun, Yi Dongxing, and even Wang Qinglei. Phone calls rang one after another. Sometimes when he was talking, there was already a notification tone that someone else was calling him. But the phone call he was most looking forward to never rang. He moved forward in silence. The other party responded with silence. Tianan was getting closer and closer. Li Huaqing looked down at the phone screen that was still lit up and narrowed his eyes. It was Guo Wentian's phone call. Now, he finally couldn't sit still anymore? He twitched the corner of his mouth, swiped the phone, and answered the call. Guo Wentian on the other end of the phone did not speak for a while, as if he did not know what to say. Li Huaqing did not speak either, just waiting for Guo Wentian to speak. Guo Wentian's breathing became more and more obvious. His personal position, the position of the Prince Group, and his position in Zhongzhou State, each position was constantly contradictory to what he wanted to say and his attitude. From his breathing, Li Huaqing could clearly hear his constant struggle and entanglement. Is it too urgent? Guo Wenyin was silent for nearly a minute before he whispered and asked hesitantly, "Are you afraid?" Li Huaqing laughed. His words were so blunt that they were a little harsh. Guo Wenyin was not angry. Instead, he was silent for a long time, and then he said slowly, "I don't know." Li Huaqing did not say anything. Guo Wenyin continued, "I don't know if I'm afraid. I don't even know what I'm afraid of. Are you afraid? Are you afraid that he will kill me?" Li Huaqing's smile was obvious. "He has the guts," Guo Wenyin said in a deep voice, and then continued with a sigh. "At his age, it doesn't matter if he pierces the sky. He's so young and has this kind of strength, that's why there are restrictions." Li Huaqing said blandly, "I'm not afraid that he will kill me, and we haven't reached that point yet. But I'm afraid that he will leave Xianxia state. This is not the result I want." Guo Wenyin snorted unconsciously. Of course, he was afraid of Li Tianlan leaving Xianxia state. The parliament was aggressive. If Li Tianlan really fell out with Xianxia state out of anger, Guo Wenyin could be sure that he would not survive, not to mention what would happen to Li Huaqing. This was the absolute dominance of extreme personal force. As the number one on the divine list from Xianxia state, if he was forced to leave Xianxia state, the anger and hatred in his heart could make Li Tianlan do anything in his extreme thoughts. No one in the whole Xianxia state could stop Li Tianlan's assassination. This was probably the way to perish together with him. Because if Li Tianlan really did this, no country in the world would dare to accept him, and his end was already doomed. Guo Wenyin silently thought about all kinds of possibilities, and finally said in a low voice, "You are playing with fire. On the contrary, this is the safest way to do it." Li Huaqing said blandly. There was a harsh sound from the phone, and there was only 10% battery left. Li Huaqing sighed softly. "You still don't understand." He didn't explain anything and silently hung up the phone. Perhaps the whole Xianxia state now thought that he was playing with fire, but the safest way was actually his way now. The supervisory group's entry into Xianxia was just the first step. If Li Tianlan didn't agree to hand over Li Guangtu, more obvious and stronger suppression would follow tomorrow morning. Li Huaqing would not go easy on him. This time, he would try his best to suppress the living space of Emperor Dong's palace at all levels. This was not to force Li Tianlan to leave Xianxia state. On the contrary, it was to better keep him in Xianxia state. So Li Huaqing came in person. In the stormy suppression, Li Huaqing sent himself to Li Tianlan. From an objective point of view, it was equivalent to giving his life to Li Tianlan. Li Huaqing was very sure that as long as he was still in Emperor Dong's palace, no matter how fierce the parliament's next move was, Li Tianlan would not really leave Xianxia state. The reason? The reason was that he was still by Li Tianlan's side. It was so simple but not simple. As long as he was in Emperor Dong's palace, this was the biggest leeway. It seemed that all kinds of means to fall out with him were just the parliament showing its strength. The parliament also had to show its strength. Not everything could be negotiated. Li Huaqing was very clear about this. Perhaps Li Tianlan himself didn't know how terrible the consequences would be after mastering such strength and power at his age, and how serious the disaster might be to Xianxia state if there were no corresponding restrictions. Youth represented unlimited potential. When Li Tianlan had fulfilled his potential, his youth represented immaturity, a dangerous mindset that wandered outside the rules at any time. This was unacceptable to Li Huaqing. So in any case, he had to find a strong opponent for Li Tianlan. Even if this opponent would fail, it didn't matter, because it would take time. During this time, Li Tianlan would really mature and understand what he should do. Li Huaqing silently glanced at the phone. On the phone call from Dongqing Wudi or Li Tianlan that he had been expecting never rang. Even from the beginning to the present, he had never received any call from the new group or the giant group. Li Huaqing's eyes gradually became dignified. In the unusual silence, he clearly smelled a touch of fighting and gunpowder. The helicopter flew over Nanyun and the first city in Tiannan. The brightly lit Xinyuan city was close at hand. "President, we will arrive at Emperor Dong's palace soon." Ma Si sat opposite Li Huaqing and said in a serious and dignified voice. Li Huaqing took a last look at the phone, said yes, and closed his eyes. The plane flew over the lights of Xianxia City. Ma Si stood up and planned to go to the cockpit to say something to the pilot. At the same time, on the soft lawn of Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan, who stood with Dongqing Wudi but rarely spoke, raised his head and glanced at the night sky in the distance. At this moment, the sound of the helicopter's rotors had not yet come from afar. Emperor Dong's palace was quiet in the night. Li Tianlan raised one hand to the night where only the signal lights were flashing in the distance. Boom! In an instant, with Li Tianlan as the center, the world suddenly twisted. The surging and incredible sword energy surged, and the sharp sword intent was completely boiling. The world was torn apart in an instant, and the whole night was completely replaced by sword energy. Like a vast ocean, the sword energy stirred the night tens of thousands of meters away in an instant along the direction where Li Tianlan raised his hand. The sharp sword energy spread noisily. The helicopter that had just entered the sky above Xianxia City was out of control instantly. The rotating rotors were silently cut into pieces by the sword energy. The helicopter flying in the air suddenly spun and rolled in the air, smashing into the lights on the ground. Li Tianlan raised his hand and closed it slightly. The sword energy all over the sky vibrated at the same time. The falling helicopter seemed to be gripped by an invisible hand at this moment. With the overwhelming sword energy, the helicopter was directly pulled by the invisible hand and rushed into Emperor Dong's palace at an unimaginable speed. The cabin was spinning. Li Huaqing's face was abnormally ruddy. Ma Si fell in the corner with a broken head and a desperate look on his face. The endless sword energy pulled the helicopter from the edge of Xianxia City all the way to Li Tianlan. The helicopter crashed to the ground, and the huge fuselage slid out of control on the lawn, leaving a deep mark hundreds of meters long. The solid landing gear and the glass in the cabin were completely shattered. Dense cracks appeared on the black fuselage, which had originally looked very majestic under the wrath of the sword chi. The ridiculously broken helicopter slid all the way and stopped less than 5 meters away from Li Tianlan. With a dull sound, the heavy cabin door of the helicopter fell to the ground, splashing a cloud of smoke and dust. Li Tianlan squinted and looked at Li Huaqing in the cabin, who was facing him motionlessly because of the seat belt. He said expressionlessly, "You're too slow. I'll give you a hand. Welcome to Xianxia City. Welcome to Emperor Dong's palace." Chapter 12-13. The wind under the curtain of night had completely frozen. In the extreme silence, only the cracks on the helicopter were emitting light sounds and spreading. The sword chi was silent, but it was everywhere. Fine and sharp, it moved around the helicopter, from the cockpit to the fuselage, and then to the tail. More and more cracks appeared. It was as if a pale white flower had suddenly bloomed on the pitch-black fuselage of the helicopter. Irregular patterns were quietly spreading, as if to surround the entire huge fuselage. Dizziness, anger, helplessness, solemnity, all kinds of emotions and perceptions kept tumbling in Li Huaqing's heart. His body seemed to be immersed in the dizziness of the helicopter out of control and rolling in the air. At that moment, the world was spinning, and death seemed to have shown a grim sneer in the night outside the cabin. The majestic sword energy wrapped the helicopter and kept accelerating, dragging them to Emperor Dong's palace, as if death was mercilessly pulling them into hell. At that moment, what Li Huaqing felt was not fear, but a sense of weightlessness that was completely beyond his control. The helicopter's engine seemed to be barely able to maintain stability, but that kind of power was too fragile under the sword energy. All the stability was completely destroyed in an instant. The sword energy surrounded and pulled him, and the seat belt that held his body in place tightened to the limit. After the world spun around him, his body leaned forward crazily under the violent pull. The bulletproof glass of the cabin was shattered by the sword energy, and the warm night wind of Tian'an poured into the cabin violently under the absolute acceleration, bringing with it an indescribable coldness. This feeling would never be forgotten. If this was a show of strength, then it could only be said that this show of strength was really powerful. He was showing the power of Zhongzhou state to Li Tianlan. And now, Li Tianlan was also showing his own power to him. He heard Li Tianlan's emotionless voice and felt the omnipresent sharpness in Emperor Dong's palace. The sharp sharpness covered the sky and the earth. It was so sharp that it was almost fearless and directly pressed against his heart. Phew! Li Huaqing let out a long breath. Li Tianlan stood outside the cabin, motionless like a statue, looking at him with no expression. Li Huaqing took a deep look at him, unfastened the seatbelt, walked to the corner of the cabin, and pulled Ma Si up. Ma Si had fallen into a coma. When the helicopter lost control, Ma Si unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. The out-of-control helicopter tumbled in the air. Caught off guard, Ma Si's body also lost control and crashed into the metal door in front of the cockpit. He instinctively grabbed the nearest handrail, but as the sword chi pulled the helicopter, the sudden acceleration directly threw Ma Si to the other side of the cabin. Under the huge impact, the top secret of Zhongzhou state directly fainted. Li Huaqing pulled up his secretary with some difficulty. Before he could drag Ma Si out of the cabin, Dongqing Wudi had already walked in first. "Leave it to me. I'll treat his wound." Dongqing Wudi smiled and lifted Ma Si with great ease. Then he went to the cockpit, picked up the driver who was also unconscious, and looked at Li Huaqing. Li Huaqing pondered for a moment and nodded. He knew very well that at this time, no matter where Dongqing Wudi stood, he did not want to stay between him and Li Tianlan. This was also acceptable for him and Li Tianlan. Without Dongqing Wudi here, Li Huaqing, who faced Li Tianlan alone, would feel more pressure. And precisely because of his absence, Li Huaqing was also more likely to have a deeper talk with Li Tianlan. Li Huaqing quickly left the scene with the two wounded. Li Huaqing sat in the broken cabin for a while. When the dizziness in his mind almost disappeared, he took a deep breath and walked out of the cabin. The helicopter will be towed away to check the fault. Fortunately, if it hadn't broken down near Emperor Dong's palace, the consequences would have been unpredictable. Li Tianlan said lightly. "Fault." Li Huaqing's eyes narrowed and he said with a smile, "So, I should thank you for saving my life?" "You're welcome." Li Tianlan was still expressionless. Li Huaqing smiled. He was very curious as to why he could smile now. All his actions since he came to the stage seemed very gentle. But gentleness did not mean that he had no temper, nor did it mean that he would appear to be weak. In fact, in the hearts of many people, the gentle and calm Li Huaqing was far more deterrent than the other counselors who banged the table and roared. But at this moment, Li Huaqing was really not angry. Even if the young man in front of him attacked him, destroyed a helicopter, and even made him and his secretary extremely embarrassed, his heart was calm. Maybe it was because he valued him too much, and in his heart, he also had too many expectations for him? Li Huaqing never knew that he would value a person so much and be optimistic about his future, even though the two of them were now on opposite sides. The third supervisory group's entry into Xianxia is just the beginning. Li Huaqing said, in the next few months, the 1st to the 10th supervisory groups will be sent out one after another. The inspection scope is very large, including Wuxia, Liaodong, Beihai, Nanyue, Southwest, and Northern City. This is the normal inspection tour before the election. Xianxia is just the first stop. This time, the 3rd supervisory group's inspection scope is Xianxia, Zhonghuai, and Huading. I believe you really. Li Tianlan nodded lightly, and his tone was a little careless. He did believe what Li Huaqing said, but it did not mean that the 3rd supervisory group had no other purpose in entering Xianxia. Whether they had other purposes or not, Li Huaqing's words stood. Li Huaqing turned his head to look at Li Tianlan and suddenly laughed. He reached out and pointed at Li Tianlan. "You boy, I know you have emotions, so when I just came to Emperor Dong's palace, you gave me a show of strength. Or are you unhappy? Do you want to beat me to vent your anger?" Li Tianlan turned his head to look at Li Huaqing, and the corner of his mouth twitched symbolically. "I can understand your emotions, and even understand what you think of me now. But in my current position, I have things I should do." "I don't have emotions," Li Tianlan said lightly, "but there is one thing that needs to be clarified. You came at the wrong time. At this time, it is difficult for Emperor Dong's palace to really welcome you." Li Huaqing smiled casually. Next, I will deal with some internal affairs that belong to our Li family, or the family affairs of the Li family. This is our own business, and we will not welcome anyone who wants to intervene. How do you know that I am going to intervene in this matter? Li Huaqing was calm. Li Tianlan did not answer him, but smiled casually and said, "It's best that you are not. Maybe I misunderstood." He paused and continued, "But many people seem to be very interested in the family affairs of the Li family. Maybe you don't want to intervene, but others seem to be ready to intervene." He looked at Li Huaqing and suddenly laughed. "I'm going to stay in Xinyuan City during this period of time. I'd like to see exactly what kind of things dare to extend their claws towards me and interfere in my family's affairs. If I really see them, I'll chop them into pieces. I think you won't mind, right?" Li Huaqing stopped laughing. He looked at Li Tianlan and narrowed his eyes. Li Tianlan was also looking at him. The two of them stared at each other. They were expressionless. Chapter 12-14. It was 3 o'clock at night. The sudden ringtone of the cell phone rang in the quiet bedroom, dispelling the gentle dream in the warm bedroom. The desk lamp lit up almost as soon as the cell phone rang. Zhao Changjiang, who was in pajamas, took the cell phone and looked at the number. His originally vigilant and solemn face changed dramatically. It seemed that he was very scared. He answered the phone without hesitation and said in a deep voice, "Speaker." Because of his profession, he often received sudden calls in the middle of the night. It might be from the ministry, or it might be from some subordinates who were close to him, or it might be some serious case or something else. But he never thought that he would receive a call from his immediate superior at this time. The remaining sleepiness disappeared the moment he answered the phone. Zhao Changjiang, who was completely awake, had already reached out to find his clothes. "Old Li, come to my place for a short meeting." On the phone, the steady and graceful female voice laughed. "Am I disturbing your rest?" Zhao Changjiang's heart relaxed a little with the laughter on the phone. He also laughed. "I'm used to it. But I was really shocked when I received your call. There are some things that need to be dealt with urgently. Let's talk face to face later." The other party said lightly and then hung up the phone. Zhao Changjiang began to put on his clothes quickly. Just like when he suddenly heard the whistle for emergency assembly in the middle of the night in the army, he was serious, hurried, meticulous, and resolute. "What's wrong?" Beside Zhao Changjiang, the woman who was nearly 50 years old but still attractive asked a little lazily. She raised her hand to rub her eyes and complained, "What's wrong this time? There are really too many troubles in the local area. Tell me, when have you been free from worry in the past few years? You're so busy that you don't eat regularly. You're on tenterhooks even when you sleep. I'm almost suffering from a nervous breakdown because of you." The speaker called me personally and said that he wants to have an emergency meeting. Zhao Changjiang shook his head and said gently, "Go to sleep first. It's all right." "Cousin called you? At this time?" The woman's sleepiness and laziness faded away in an instant. She suddenly sat up in bed. "What happened?" "I'm not sure yet." Zhao Changjiang shook his head. He didn't say it in his heart, but he was almost certain that Speaker Bai, who had never made any big moves since he came to Liaodong, was going to do something big this time. The woman's expression was a little uncertain. Her name was Zhao Qing, a distant relative of the Bai family in Yuzhou. In terms of relationship, she should call Bai Qingqian cousin, but in fact, the blood relationship between them was very thin, the kind that could not be more distant. Although they were distant relatives, Zhao Qing had been very close to Bai Qingqian since they were young. Although they were relatives in name, they could be said to be best friends who could talk about anything. Zhao Changjiang and Zhao Qing were even married. They were all introduced by Bai Qingqian back then. At that time, Zhao Zhang was transferred from the Southern Station District to Liaodong. In addition to the fact that Bai Qingqian really needed a trusted confidant to be her right-hand man, Bai Qingqian also wanted to chat with her good friend for a long time. Zhao Changjiang was one of the 11 provincial council members of Liaodong province and the head of the Liaodong police department. It was no exaggeration to say that he was Bai Qingqian's right-hand man in Liaodong. Although Bai Qingqian came to Liaodong because of the cooperation between the two groups, She did not stand on ceremony when it came to consolidating her right to speak. For nearly 5 years, the overall level of Liaodong seemed to be extremely stable, but Bai Qingqian had long been in power. Her words carried enormous weight, and she quietly overshadowed the sharpness of the governor of Liaodong. The main reason was that she had grasped what she should control in her hands. The Ministry of Personnel, which controlled personnel, was the first thing she grasped, followed by the Ministry of Supervision, and then the propaganda system. Finally, she transferred Zhao Changjiang to control the police department, plus the chief steward of the provincial government, who was bound to keep pace with Bai Qingqian. After mastering 4 powerful departments, Bai Qingqian had already established an absolute advantage in Liaodong. In less than 5 years, Bai Qingqian was almost unshakable in Liaodong. There was no doubt that if she did not leave in this election, the whole Liaodong would be included in the territory of the giant group or the new group. This was undoubtedly what the academics absolutely did not want to see. This was one of their most core territories. As the election approached, the ups and downs of Bai Qingqian's sprint to the parliament made the whole Liaodong turbulent in recent days. All kinds of signs had appeared a few months ago. At this time, in the middle of the night, Bai Qingqian suddenly called for an emergency meeting. Zhao Changjiang could hardly imagine the content of this meeting. "You sleep first. I'm going." Zhao Changjiang looked at his wife on the bed, whose expression changed. He took a deep breath and went straight out of his room. He lived in the 6th building of the provincial government compound, not far from the 1st building where Bai Qingqian lived. Zhao Changjiang put on his coat and went out. It was cold in winter in Liaodong. The courtyard was silvery white, and it was snowing heavily again. Zhao Changjiang stepped on the snowflakes and walked in the courtyard of the provincial government compound in the middle of the night. His eyes were firm. Many years ago, he was injured in the Border Control Corps and transferred to the military headquarters. From the military headquarters, he entered the Southern Station District and then transferred from the military system to Liaodong. His style had never changed. He was calm, firm, and fearless. After more than 4 years in Liaodong, Zhao Changjiang had already established his image as an iron-fisted person. Zhao Changjiang passed by the 4th building of the provincial government compound. The door of the detached villa in the 4th building was just opened. A slightly fat woman in her 50s just wrapped her coat tightly and came out. When she saw Zhao Changjiang, she was slightly stunned. Oldly, Zhao Changjiang was also a little surprised. "The 1st building?" "Yes, boss. Bai summoned me in the middle of the night. I dare not neglect it." The middle-aged woman chuckled. Her figure was slightly plump, and her face was round. In the midst of the falling snow, she looked somewhat benevolent. This was another trusted general of Bai Qingqian, who had come from Qinzhou province. She followed Bai Qingqian all the way to Liaodong, the Iron Lady. When Bai Qingqian was the governor of Qinzhou, she served as the non-director deputy governor of Qinzhou. Now she was one of the 11 directors of Liaodong and in charge of the Ministry of Supervision. Compared with Zhao Changjiang, who was an iron-fisted person, Guan Yuan in the system of Liaodong was obviously more afraid of this seemingly amiable little old woman. "Let's go together." Zhao Changjiang nodded. "Yesterday, Ningning and Haoyang wandered outside for a day and had dinner here. The 2 children said that they wanted to travel abroad to see the world. Oldly, Haoyang said that he didn't plan to take over your job in the future, nor did he want to be a policeman. After graduation, he planned to do business. This trip abroad seems to be to investigate some project. What's your attitude?" Yi Han, who was known as the Iron Lady in Liaodong, looked at Zhao Changjiang with a smile. Her daughter and Zhao Changjiang's son both went to school in Huading, and they were in the same school and the same year. The 2 children had been in love for 2 years and had a very good relationship. It was only a matter of time that the 2 families would get married. They often visited each other, and their parents were also very supportive of them being together. "That brat still hasn't told me about it. Looks like your mother-in-law found out first." Zhao Changjiang was a little stunned and his tone was a little unhappy. "My old Han intends to give the 2 children a startup capital and even plans to send someone to accompany them abroad, but it depends on your attitude." Yi Han chuckled. "Let them be." Zhao Changjiang shook his head. "I don't care about this. You can discuss it with Zhao Qing. The two children will graduate this year, right? At this time next year, I'm afraid that you and I will not be in Liaodong. It may not be convenient to meet in the future. In my opinion, we should settle their relationship this year. Ningning is a good child. Once she enters my family, I promise I won't treat her badly. Okay. Yi Han's voice was very happy. My old Han also means the same. Ask the two children what they say. If there is no problem, try to let them get married after graduation. The two chatted casually, but their voices gradually lowered. In their sight, the third and seventh buildings of the provincial government compound lit up one after another. Zhao Changjiang and Yi Han looked at each other and both of them were silent. Everyone knew what kind of people lived in the third and seventh buildings of the provincial government compound. They could be said to be comrades who advanced and retreated with them. The one who lived in the seventh building controlled the propaganda system of Liaodong and was Bai Qingqian's college classmate. The one in the third building controlled the Ministry of Personnel of Liaodong. He was transferred from Yuzhou at that time because the Bai family directly supported Bai Qingqian. Plus Zhao Changjiang and Yi Han. This was the perception of outsiders. Bai Qingqian was one of the 4 heavenly kings in Liaodong. In the middle of the night, Bai Qingqian actually informed the 4 of them at once. What did this mean? Liaodong, Yi Han sighed in a low voice. Is the most chaotic situation going to start in Liaodong this time? Chapter 12:15. The thick material turned to the last page. Under the soft light, Bai Qingqian put the material aside, picked up the teacup, and took a sip of water. She looked calm. This material had been sent to her office a few months ago. At that time, Bai Qingqian read it over and over again several times. Finally, because she didn't make up her mind, she temporarily sealed it up. The material involved a series of events such as the corridor transformation project of the Liaodong provincial government, as well as a large number of illegal trade in Anong. The target was Tan Xiaotian, the current deputy speaker of Fengtian Academy. There were more than 100,000 words of a large number of reports. Obviously, it was not written by one person, but from many aspects. The time span was as long as 5 years. Although there was no real name, a large number of reports were indeed true. To a certain extent, it could even be said that the evidence was conclusive. Even Bai Qingqian had an impression of many things mentioned in the material. This material appeared in her hands about 3 months ago. The source was still unknown. It was obvious that the election was coming. Because the election was coming, this was a spark sent to her by some people who wanted to fish in troubled waters. However, Bai Qingqian had never acted rashly. After reading the material in detail, she had already begun to let Yi Han's Ministry of Supervision take action secretly. Now, she had also grasped a lot of breakthrough clues. Some of Tan Xiaotian's practices had been arrogant to the point of brazen. The secret investigation of the Ministry of Supervision did not even encounter any even symbolic resistance. Some vague evidence had already appeared in the hands of the Ministry of Supervision. So 2 months ago, the provincial government personally issued a notice that Tan Xiaotian was sent to the Xianxia Academy in Liaodong to enter the advanced course. Then, he began a half-year-long advanced course. When the news came out, there was no panic in Liaodong. Instead, there was jubilation. The Xianxia Academy in Zhengzhou State was the fundamental and important place of the academics. Its importance was even above that of Liaodong. There were quite a number of super heavyweights in the academics, including Li Huaqing, who had the background of the academy. Because of this, they were jokingly called the academics by the outside world. Specifically in Liaodong, the academy was obviously also a place where it was difficult for Bai Qingqian to influence. Tan Xiaotian had entered the academy's advanced class and not the training class. This was usually a sign that he was going to be promoted. In the past 2 years, the situation in Zhengzhou State seemed to be stable. But as the election got closer and closer, undercurrents were surging not only in Liaodong, but also in all provinces. When Bai Qingqian first entered Liaodong, she had already hurt the nerves of some people in Liaodong. In the past few years when she came to Liaodong, under the seemingly harmonious situation, there had been a lot of conflicts. Among them, Tan Xiaotian could be said to be a representative person. Something. If Tan Xiaotian was transferred from the position of Deputy Speaker of Anong Province to the position of Deputy Speaker of Fengtian Provincial Government was by Qingxian's concession, then letting Tan Xiaotian enter the advanced course was undoubtedly by Qingxian's preparation for leaving Liaodong Province. In a sense, this seemed to be a sign that the academics had begun to exert their power and was ready to set things right in Liaodong. Tan Xiaotian entered the advanced class. Half a year later was basically very close to the time of the election. And the election in Liaodong Province might be before or after the election in Zhongzhou State. This time sequence determined whether Bai Qingxian could stay in Liaodong for a year or more than half a year. Therefore, now the academics in Liaodong were strongly supporting the election in Liaodong Province to be held before the election in Zhongzhou State. Tan Xiaotian entering the advanced class was a signal. When he returned from the academy and symbolically stayed in this position for a few days, it was very likely that he would be promoted from deputy speaker to one of the directors of Liaodong Province, the speaker of Fengtian Province, and become the new representative figure of the academy in Liaodong Province. This was undoubtedly the best choice. In recent decades, several speakers of Fengtian Province had directly ascended to the position of governor of Liaodong Province. Many people hoped that Tan Xiaotian could seize this clear line between heaven and earth. To say the least, even if he couldn't seize it, after the advanced class, Tan Xiaotian was likely to directly serve as the deputy governor of Liaodong Province, enter the council, and become the third person in the provincial government. This kind of rumor was getting clearer and clearer now. Obviously, the academics had begun to focus on the ecology of Liaodong Province after Bai Qingxian left. Bai Qingxian would be elected as a member of parliament of Zhongzhou State in this election. After he left Liaodong Province, the new speaker of Liaodong Province would also be elected as a member of parliament of Zhongzhou State under the influence of Bai Qingxian and the power support of the academics, and he would take charge of Liaodong Province. This person must be an important figure of the academics. In this way, the promotion channel of the academics was preliminarily perfected. As Bai Qingxian took the new post, the 4 supermasters under him would inevitably leave here one by one and go to different places. From the bottom of her heart, because the cooperation with the academics in recent years was quite pleasant, Bai Qingxian did not intend to make a big earthquake before she left. After all, she was still the speaker of Liaodong Province. She was responsible for anything that happened in Liaodong Province. That was why she temporarily hung Tan Xiaotian up. After he left, she would hand this problem to her successor. The successor must be one of the leaders of the academics and would know how to deal with the internal affairs of Liaodong Province in a low-key manner. This way, even if she left this place, she wouldn't lose too many points. However, it was obvious that her careful consideration to some extent was regarded as weakness by some people with ulterior motives in Liaodong. Therefore, these days, the internal affairs of Liaodong became more and more unstable. Bai Qingxian was still hesitating. But the matter of the third supervisory group entering Xianxia directly stimulated Bai Qingxian to make up her mind completely. The other party had already begun to take action against the new group and Li Tianlan. Bai Qingxian naturally would not be polite. She had a card in her hand and did not bother to wait for the signal from Yuzhou from Bai Zhanfang and Zhou Mulin. At this moment, before leaving the academics, she just wanted to lift this shameful cover and see how much shocking darkness was brewing inside. Now that she had shed all pretense of cordiality, Bai Qingxian did not mind giving everyone in the academics a hard slap in the face. Bai Qingxian took another sip of tea, and her eyes became more indifferent and determined. "Speaker, Minister Yi is here." The secretary knocked lightly on the door, walked in and whispered, "Invite her in." Bai Qingxian nodded. Yi Han, who was slightly fat, came over and said with a smile, "Those guys are still outside. They said they wanted to smoke before coming in." Bai Qingxian nodded and asked directly, "Can we do it directly about Tan Xiaotian's problem?" Yi Han's face changed slightly. Obviously, she did not expect Bai Qingxian to be so direct. She hesitated and whispered, "Are you sure? If we can do it, let's do it." Bai Qingxian waved her hand lightly. When Changjiang and the others come in, we will discuss the result together. It's time for some people to wake up. Yihan took a deep breath and did not speak. Bai Qingqian held the teacup with a calm face. She thought of the leader and deputy leader of the third supervisory group. She thought of what they would do after entering Xianxia. Bai Qingqian gently raised the corner of her mouth. She was calm and confident, with indescribable grace. She did not have so many thoughts. She had only one thought now. Who dared to make life difficult for her son? She would let them die a horrible death. Chapter 12:16. Li Huaqing didn't see Li Guangtu in the end. He didn't even know Li Guangtu's current state from Li Tianlun. He just knew that Li Guangtu was still alive. Angry? Annoyed? Resentful? More or less, these emotions existed in his heart, but more than that, it was a kind of calmness that was expected. Before coming to Emperor Dong's palace, he had expected the current situation, so he was not surprised. If Li Tianlan was really so easy to talk to, the whole Zhongzhou state would not be in a sensitive state of anxiety now. Obviously, this matter could not be solved in a day or two. In the end, it still depended on fists and strength. Dongqing Wudi guessed that Li Huaqing came here in such a hurry because he had a trump card. Not only Dongqing Wudi, because everyone else, based on their understanding of Li Huaqing, felt that he had a trump card. In the past 10 years, Li Huaqing had been gentle and occasionally strong. But no matter what he did, he would not make things unmanageable in the end. His steadiness made the whole Zhongzhou state trust him for 10 years, and this time seemed to be no exception. Li Huaqing did have a trump card. It was the kind of trump card that could immediately reach an agreement with Li Tianlan and could definitely make Li Tianlan compromise and let him go. With this trump card, he was 100% sure that he could persuade Li Tianlan. Even without persuasion, Li Tianlan could compromise. But that was not the way to play cards. If the so-called negotiation was destined to be unconditionally compromised all the time, it was not a negotiation, but a plunder. There was more than one way to get Li Guangtu back. If the hard way didn't work, he could use the soft way. Li Huaqing fully believed that as long as he unconditionally compromised, satisfied Li Tianlan's demand, and allowed Emperor Dong's palace to plunder a considerable part of the various resources of Zhongzhou state, he could take Li Guangtu away at any time. But Zhongzhou state was not a logistics base that could be plundered by Li Tianlan. Negotiation, game, dispute, confrontation. Li Huaqing had to take him away. But before letting Li Tianlan see his trump card, Li Huaqing had to let Li Tianlan see his own strength first. This was the case on any occasion. Only when one side showed their strength first could they be qualified to talk on equal terms. He had to let Li Tianlan realize that the attitude of Zhongzhou state was not inferior. Zhongzhou state could give benefits to Emperor Dong's palace, but it could also completely destroy the system of Emperor Dong's palace. Perhaps Li Tianlan knew this. But being able to do it and daring to do it were two completely different things. What Li Huaqing wanted to show was the power that could destroy Emperor Dong's palace at any time. To put it simply, he wanted to show off a few of his abilities. After that, when the situation became stable again, Li Tianlan might become more mature in reflection. This was a battle of attrition. It was a battle and game between Li Tianlan and Li Huaqing. The focus of the game was Li Guangtu. The bargaining chips were the resources of Emperor Dong's palace and the academics. As the election approached, a storm was brewing. Li Huaqing, who was confirmed to be re-elected, and the entire academics should have been the most quiet group, but now the academics had become the first group to jump out. For Li Guangtu? Li Huaqing didn't think so. He was indeed the focus of the dispute between him and Emperor Dong's palace. But whether it was to protect Gu Xingyun, Li Guangtu, or to accept Jiang Shangyu, Li Huaqing was very clear-headed from beginning to end. He had only one goal. Not for Gu Xingyun, Li Guangtu, and Jiang Shangyu. It was for Li Tianlan. Just for Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was very polite to him, but also very impolite. The direct result of the disagreement was that Li Tianlan directly left. He was really leaving. Li Huaqing didn't even see Li Tianlan leave. After saying those harsh words, Li Tianlan just turned around and disappeared from his sight. The president, who was left alone in Emperor Dong's palace, stood alone and smoked a cigarette. Then he saw Xiao Mahai, who was now the chief butler of Emperor Dong's palace, walking over with a smile. They didn't talk about the old days. They were not familiar with each other. The general, who had blatantly embezzled tens of millions of prison funds in the past 2 years, had formally submitted his resignation a month ago. Li Huaqing also signed the resignation letter. Someone had taken over Xiao Mahai's position as the director of Emperor Dong's palace. Xiao Mahai, who had left the desert, went to Tiannan and became the director of Emperor Dong's palace. He seemed to be living a good life. Xiao Mahai arranged for Li Huaqing to stay in a villa in the central area of Emperor Dong's palace. The villa complex, which would probably be provided for the high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace in the future, had just been completed. There was still a slight smell in the villa, but the decoration was absolutely comfortable and luxurious. Xiao Mahai arranged for people to prepare a sumptuous meal for breakfast or supper at this time. He even opened a bottle of wine and then left. Li Huaqing, who was not sleepy at all, sank his body into the soft leather sofa and slowly tasted the wine. He was not sleepy at all. He was a little excited inside. It was like the moment when he was about to draw the sword before the decisive battle. He was completely focused, energetic, and highly focused. All the fatigue was completely suppressed and disappeared without a trace. Li Huaqing seemed to have completely entered the fighting state. He had already made sufficient mental preparations for this game. It could be victory, failure, or inevitable losses. All of these were within the range of what he could accept. He held the power in his hand, and this power had completely locked on the target. He could not hesitate, and must completely vent it out. He just didn't know if Li Tianlan had already made the same preparation. Li Huaqing held the wineglass and looked at the deep night outside the window, like a peerless swordsman holding a famous sword, waiting for the dawn. Li Tianlan did not rest either. He returned to the top floor of the castle, where only he lived. In the spacious and luxurious living room, the maid Mai Shiranui, who came from East Island with all kinds of thoughts, had not left yet. She sat quietly on the sofa and was in a daze. She had changed out of her sexy and revealing clothes. She was wearing a pure white exquisite dress, black stockings, and a pair of seductive red stilettos. She sat quietly in the spotless living room. Her legs, which were shimmering in black stockings, were crossed. She was elegant and quiet. Rather than a maid, she was more like a well-dressed imperial concubine waiting for the arrival of the emperor, or a princess looking forward to the arrival of her lover. She seemed to be thinking about something, so she did not come to her senses when Li Tianlan suddenly appeared in the room. She was thinking about her life and the future. Mai Shiranui had never denied her desire for power. This desire included many things, such as the fanatical worship of real power, the power to dominate the dark world, the power to rule the world and sweep everything, and so on. She had always had a goal in her life. When many so-called young talents in the dark world of East Island worshipped her as a goddess, those people never existed in her eyes. At the beginning, her master Shinichi Miyamoto, the supreme ninja of the invincible realm who supported Liuhua Palace and made it as famous as Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Training School, was incomparably lofty in her heart. At that time, the only thing Mai Shiranui wanted was to inherit everything from her master and lead Liuhua Palace to surpass Jifeng Sword Training School and Wuji Palace to become a super force in the dark world. After Shinichi Miyamoto died in the hands of tribulation, her target became Li Kuangtu. The Purgatory of Heaven capital appeared in East Island. At that time, the man with the code name God, holding a death scythe, was quiet and almost invisible most of the time, but he could fight tit-for-tat with Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong without falling behind. He indeed had the glory that shone on the whole dark world. Mai Shiranui didn't want to admit it, but she knew very well that in the most glorious years of the Purgatory of Heaven capital in East Island, she had many sleepless nights because of Li Kuangtu. His almost desperate power became something she was crazy about and also the driving force for her continuous progress. She longed to be conquered by such a man and to be owned by such a man. Appearance. None of these things mattered to her. When she tossed and turned countless nights, She could even disdain the pursuit of the royal crown prince. At that time, there was only the incomparable power in her eyes. She dreamed of becoming Li Guangtu's woman, sleeping beside him, wearing Li Guangtu's invincible aura, and enjoying the awe of the whole dark world. Mai Shiranui could see that Li Guangtu was tempted by her. Many times she could feel the rising temperature in Li Guangtu's eyes. However, whether it was the royal prince who accompanied Li Guangtu or Phoenix of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, they all regarded her as a great threat and guarded her so tightly that there was no suitable opportunity. Li Guangtu was indeed lustful, but he was not the kind of person who was desperate. If he didn't have the chance to eat her, he wouldn't force her. That was the most glorious years of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Now it seemed that it was also the peak period of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. After the chaos in Snow Country, the Purgatory of Heaven capital began to fall from the peak at a speed that no one expected. Wang Tianzong's breakthrough completely suppressed the powerful aura on Li Guangtu. The Purgatory of Heaven capital left East Island. Countless forces in the dark world were withering. Emperor Dong's palace rose strongly. During that time, Mai Shiranui was lost and confused. The support for the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the account to East Island pressed her hard at that time. She didn't know who to rely on and completely lost her goal. Until the end, she found that she could only rely on her own strength. So Liuhua Palace quietly cut off the relationship with the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The invincible image of Li Guangtu that was once deeply rooted in her heart had collapsed. So when she did this, she found that she actually had no burden in her heart. She drew a clear line with the Purgatory of Heaven capital and even quietly swallowed a lot of the benefits that belonged to the Purgatory of Heaven capital. She benefited from both the Purgatory of Heaven capital and East Island. Liuhua Palace was getting stronger and stronger, and her personal strength was constantly breaking through. She thought that she had seen the future that she once looked forward to approaching, and she saw the light of hope coming from a distant place. Then the shadow that spread from Xianxia state quietly spread to East Island. There was no sign. It was natural, like the sun rising and the moon setting. The world was supposed to be like this. The shadow spread in Xianxia state. It was dark and silent, but it emitted a pretentious light. It shrouded East Island and quickly shrouded the entire dark world. It was no longer the era of Sword Emperor and Deity. Under the shadow that shrouded the dark world was the absolutely invincible light of East Emperor. It was cold, majestic, awe-inspiring, deep, and immovable like a mountain. It was a shadow that completely made the entire East Island feel completely desperate. But Mai Shiranui actually found that she didn't feel the least bit unwilling in her heart. The kind of almost fanatical worship and admiration for Li Guangtu was like magma that had cooled down and erupted again from the depths of her heart in an even more unstoppable manner. Mai Shiranui would eventually remember the first confrontation and meeting between her and Li Tianlan in East Island a few years ago. At that time, she, who was proud and arrogant, never thought that one day she would be so eager to be conquered and even ravaged by that man. She was the goddess in the hearts of many people in East Island, and she was a powerhouse in the hearts of many people in the dark world. Women in the dark world never meant that they were weak, because no matter which era, there were women standing at the peak who showed the demeanor of women. More than 20 years ago, there was Summer Solstice and Li Shi, two powerhouses who could be regarded as the peak combat power in the dark world. There was Bai Qingqian, a powerful figure who had begun to strive for the parliament. There was the female Prime Minister of England, and there was Rothschild King Tong, who controlled the Shadow Throne. In the era before Li Tianlan, there was the silent but thunderous Samsara Palace Master who supported the entire Samsara Palace. There was Situ Cangyue, the hidden god of Xianxia state who guarded Mount Taibai alone but radiated sharpness. There was the Holy Virgin Angel who controlled great power in the Holy Land. So the dark world was never lonely. It was the world of men, but women also had a bright sharpness that couldn't be ignored. In this era, there was Qin Weibai, the patriarch of the Lin clan, who had faded away and stayed with Qin Weibai but no one dared to ignore. There was Dongcheng Qiuqi, who had now ascended to the high position of governor in Xianxia. There was Bai Yu, the genius of Jade Pool who had begun to touch the threshold of the invincible realm. There was Mai Shiranui, who supported Liuhua Palace alone in East Island. There were many others. Mai Shiranui was not the most dazzling among these people, but her sharpness couldn't be ignored. Many people thought that Mai Shiranui would also become a dazzling figure who stood at the peak of the dark world and represented all the women of this era in the future. She was indifferent, arrogant, holy, noble, inviolable and inviolable. People could only look at her from afar, admire her from the bottom of their hearts, and dream about her. This was the view of countless people in East Island about Mai Shiranui. But Mai Shiranui felt that she was a bitch. She had a beautiful appearance, excellent talent, and an extraordinary identity, but she was also a bitch with a strong servility. This was not to belittle herself, but her self-awareness that was difficult for others to talk about. From Li Guangtu to Li Tianlan. She couldn't resist that kind of power. This year, she was 26 years old. She couldn't be said to be young, but she was definitely not old either. Her body was still delicate, no longer immature, and there was a trace of maturity. She was an age that became more attractive in everyone's eyes. Under Dong Huang's shadow, she longed to get Li Tianlan's approval, to be conquered by Li Tianlan, to pull her over, to kneel at his feet, and to press her proud and beautiful head to accept something. She longed for Li Tianlan to throw her on the bed and tear her expensive clothes into pieces. She longed for Li Tianlan to crash and ravage her like a beast and eat her up bit by bit in her screams. There would even be whips, candles, or other things she had seen in East Island that she didn't care about before but secretly looked forward to when they were on Li Tianlan. She longed for Li Tianlan to use everything she had under her goddess halo and enjoy her most docile and charming side. Her charm wanted to bloom around Li Tianlan. That might be a kind of light that blended with Li Tianlan's light. She would wear the dazzling light of Dong Huang and announce to the whole dark world that she was Dong Huang's woman and enjoy the awe of the whole dark world. As long as she thought about it, it was a kind of pleasure that made her almost breathless. But Li Tianlan didn't say yes. He refused her request to be his woman, but he told himself that he needed a personal maid. The goddess in the hearts of East Island people. The maid of Dong Huang. Mai Shiranui even thought it was very interesting, so she came to Emperor Dong's palace and even carefully prepared a lot of things. Mai Shiranui would never forget the strange expression on Xiao Mahai's face when he checked her luggage and found something like a whip in her suitcase. There were even some inconspicuous but interesting gadgets that could only be bought in East Island. Mai Shiranui didn't care. At that time, she burst into an extremely charming smile in front of Xiao Mahai and said that His Majesty Dong Huang asked her to bring it with him. There was no look of contempt in his eyes. She could even see a touch of pure awe and flattery in Xiao Mahai's eyes at that time. That feeling made Mai Shiranui's legs weak and her eyes a little misty. She was very sure that this was what she wanted. She knew that she could not break the limit of the invincible realm and enter the realm that she had never reached before. But she could lie docilely beside Li Tianlan, and the whole dark world would also fear and flatter her. Her Liuhua Palace could also become a superpower, even if she was not in the invincible realm, even if she was just an ordinary person who didn't know martial arts. Mai Shiranui thought quietly. Her face was a little flushed, and she rubbed her legs unconsciously, feeling that she was going to take a bath again. What are you thinking about? Li Tianlan's voice suddenly rang out in the brightly lit living room. Mai Shiranui's whole body shook. She didn't get up at first, but unconsciously made a sound like a cat's meow, soft, delicate, mellow, and sentimental. The blue veins on Li Tianlan's forehead jumped for no reason, and a nefarious fire almost uncontrollably rose from his abdomen. Your Majesty! Mai Shiranui stood up with a flushed face, a little cramped and a little flustered. A very subtle smell spread on her body. Li Tianlan glanced at her and asked directly, "Where is your room?" Mai Shiranui froze for a moment, as if she couldn't believe it, but with some expectation she said softly, "It's next to yours. I cleaned it up myself. Your Majesty, would you like to have a look?" Li Tianlan waved his hand and said, "Now, go and have a rest. I'll call you if I need anything." Mai Shiranui stood where she was, stunned for a moment, then gave a soft, "Oh," and turned to leave. Li Tianlan glanced at her unconsciously, only to find that my Shiranui's delicate white dress swayed gently as she walked, and a small wet mark was gradually growing. He frowned and didn't think much about it. He asked casually, "What's the situation in East Island now?" East Island was undoubtedly the priority at the moment. With my Shiranui, a chess piece, there shouldn't be too much trouble. My Shiranui paused and turned around. Her watery eyes became more and more hazy, and she said in a soft voice, "It's chaotic and they're scared." Li Tianlan nodded thoughtfully. My Shiranui stared at him for a while, then turned around in disappointment and walked back to her room. The door of the room was gently closed, and then opened again, leaving a very clear gap. After a while, the tempting pink light peeked out from the gap. Li Tianlan suddenly smiled, and his smile was a little happy. He suddenly thought of Li Huaqing. He could probably understand some of Li Huaqing's thoughts. Li Huaqing began to show his own power. And he came to Tiannan probably because he was afraid that Li Tianlan would do the most extreme thing, which was also the reaction he least wanted to see. It was really a wonderful move. The domestic war was tit for tat. Did he think he could control the situation just by looking at him here? At this time, if he left Xinyuan City, Li Tianlan suddenly wanted to see Li Huaqing's reaction. Chapter 12-17. When military counselor called him, Li Tianlan was about to finish watching a classic Hollywood action blockbuster. The movie had come to the end. The overwhelming wreckage of machinery was flying in the fire, and the soldiers with shields were fighting fiercely with the muscular giants. In the distance was a ruined city, and the survivors were running for their lives. All kinds of high-tech weapons were in scrupulously blooming destructive flames in the air, and the endless legions were moving forward firmly in the surging artillery fire. One picture after another was reflected in his dull pupils. He sat quietly, like a puppet, with countless thoughts flashing in his mind, about East Island, about South America, about Europe. The urgent reorganization of the internal structure of Emperor Dong's palace, the establishment of various departments, the blueprint of the new group, the game with Li Huaqing, the various investments of the Flourishing Age Fund, the future of Tiannan, his future, everything seemed to explode at once. Everything had to be done, and they had to be done as soon as possible. He didn't pay attention to what the movie was about. It was destined to be a blockbuster without too many connotations. The scenes were gorgeous and hot-blooded, and the special effects were all on. Li Tianlan's thoughts were scattered with the special effects on the screen. He looked quieter and quieter, sitting on the sofa motionlessly. Time was silent, and so was he. Gradually, he was so quiet as if he didn't exist at all. The phone rang. Li Tianlan's body moved slightly. He seemed to come alive all of a sudden. He exhaled softly, turned off the TV in front of him, picked up the phone and said, "Your Majesty, Yuzhou is a little lively." Military counselor's voice was still calm, and he came straight to the point. He used the word lively very vividly. In fact, Yuzhou was more than lively now. Li Guangtu suddenly came to Emperor Dong's palace. Such an abrupt move directly shocked the whole Zhongzhou state, and Yuzhou was now in a state of complete uproar. The parliament had not yet held a meeting to formally announce or issue any orders. But all kinds of heavyweights had begun to meet frequently. Zhou Mulin and Bai Zhanfang were secretly meeting. According to the exact news, an hour ago, Wu Jingmin, the deputy minister of the cabinet, also arrived at the Bai family's manor. Bai Qingzhao went to the building of the military department overnight. It was said that among the four spirits of Zhongzhou state, besides Li Wangxing, the Black Tortoise who was stationed in Tiannan, Azure Dragon, White Tiger, and the new Vermilion Bird had all received orders to return to Yuzhou with their terracotta soldiers. Ji Wenjiang, Wan Qingyun, and Yi Dongxing had also started secretly contacting each other an hour ago. Guo Wentian seemed ready to leave for Southwest City. The Speaker of the North City arrived at Yuzhou Province overnight and entered Zhou Yunhai's home. Not only the parliament, but also some powerful figures in Zhongzhou state had received the news and began to discuss the possible changes. Hua Xingyang's phone was ringing off the hook. Countless powerful people expressed their opinions one after another. Some hoped that Li Huaqing could be more cautious, and some hoped that Xianyuan City could take a step back. As the current CEO of Emperor Dong's palace, the military counselor also received calls from different people. Some wanted to strengthen cooperation, while others wanted to shelve previous cooperation plans. It was a complete mess. Demons danced in a frenzy. The turbulence had begun to spread to the entire Zhongzhou state from Yuzhou as the center. In 24 hours at most, the roaring hurricane would sweep across the entire Zhongzhou state. Is it exciting? Li Tianlan asked with a smile and a relaxed tone while holding the phone. Military counselor was silent for about half a minute. Obviously, he did not expect Li Tianlan's attitude to be like this at this time. Then he laughed and said, "I've experienced such a battle once, and I'm used to it. Your Majesty, the timing is a bit sensitive now, you know." Of course, Li Tianlan could understand what the so-called timing sensitivity meant. The problem of Li Guangde had now become the focus between the academics and Emperor Dong's palace. Neither side would give in. Li Huaqing's arrival in Emperor Dong's palace made everyone a little uneasy. But before the situation changed, the uneasiness was just uneasiness. They would wait and see, look for opportunities, and express their attitudes at the right time. The so-called right time was undoubtedly when the confrontation between the academics and Emperor Dong's palace had a clear winner. But now, there was a big movement in Yuzhou. It was no longer as simple as waiting and seeing. The academics and Emperor Dong's palace had stirred up chaos. Now, all the other groups and wealthy families were obviously ready to take action and showed signs of entering the fray. But there might be a lot of reasons. But there should be only a few of them who really wanted to help the academics or Emperor Dong's palace. The most important reason was because of the election. The eve of every election in Zhongzhou State was the most lively time. The situation seemed calm, but only the people in the game could really see the stormy waves. When it came to the group, every group had their own demands and wanted to complete their own layout. When it came to individuals, everyone also had their own goals. The relationship between each other, the competition inside and outside the group, and the cooperation in various fields were a complete mess. Everyone was fighting for a certain position, for a certain side's benefits. From top to bottom, the fighting was endless, spreading to every domain, every group. It was a chaotic battle. Of course, the negotiation had to be negotiated. But just like Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan now, before the negotiation, both sides wanted to show their strength. Only with great strength could their words be taken seriously, respected, and even accepted. There was less than a year before the election. Undoubtedly, the major groups also wanted to show their strength. Only then would they have more bargaining chips and be able to ask for more things. Is it going to start now? Li Tianlan smiled and looked out of the window at the night that seemed to be gradually fading away. Xianyuan City in winter was still as warm as spring, but his body still remembered the coldness that pervaded Yuzhou. He narrowed his eyes and shook his head, saying, "It's not the new year yet. It seems a little early. Because a lot of things need to be redistributed. Our appearance has impacted the structure of the sects, and many people have long been unable to hold back." Military counselor's voice was a little understated. "So in your opinion, is it a good thing or a bad thing for Emperor Dong's palace this time?" "Neither good nor bad." The military counselor laughed. "Everyone who enters the game has good intentions, but no one knows what kind of accident will happen until the end. We can only do what we should do. No matter if it's good or bad, we still need to operate." Li Tianlan's voice was more understated, even a little careless. "Well, what can you do?" Military counselor didn't speak for a while. He didn't know whether to give Li Tianlan a thumbs up or a middle finger in his heart. Li Tianlan's words, whether in an understated tone or a careless tone, were the essence of the boss. Li Tianlan's casual words obviously meant that the next task would be handed over to him. However, as the CEO of Emperor Dong's palace, it seemed to be his task indeed. This sentence was undoubtedly Li Tianlan's statement, which meant that military counselor could use all the resources that Emperor Dong's palace currently had to obtain greater benefits for Emperor Dong's palace in the next chaotic battle. As the supreme leader of Emperor Dong's palace, if Li Tianlan bowed to everything personally, the existence of military counselor and others would undoubtedly be meaningless. Li Tianlan was self-aware. He had indeed come to this position, but in terms of skill, layout, power, experience, he was not able to perfectly control all the internal details of a group. At the very least, he was not as good as military counselor in this respect. He just knew what he wanted and where Emperor Dong's palace would be next. This kind of thing involved the main strategic direction, but not the specific operation process, and Li Tianlan was competent. The goal of the new group after the election was very clear. In the case of keeping Xianxia, they would take down the 4 provinces of Nanyue, Siye, Dongshan, and Jiangnan. In the case of perfecting the internal promotion system of the group, they would try their best to conquer the cabinet and occupy a relatively strong position. With the 5 provinces and Tiannan as the foundation, the radiating influence and the power of the cabinet would support each other. In the overall strategy of the whole Zhongzhou state, resources would be inclined to Emperor Dong's palace to a certain extent, and it would protect the integration of the new group, the giant group, and the north group. This was the strategic direction of Emperor Dong's palace in Zhongzhou state in the next 10 years that Li Tianlan had personally formulated. The next implementation, the allocation of a large number of resources, and the operation of human relations were the responsibility of the CEO military counselor. Li Tianlan gave the direction to lead Emperor Dong's palace. He didn't care about the process, only the final result. I'm on my way to the Bai family manor. On the phone, military counselor smiled gently. He was the CEO of Emperor Dong's palace, but after all, he had nothing to do with the parliament of Zhongzhou state. On the surface, he was just a businessman. At this time, he naturally had to unite all the forces that could be united to intervene in this chaotic battle. Dongqing Wudi was still in Emperor Dong's palace. At present, Zhou Mulin and Bai Zhanfang represented the giant group in Yuzhou, and Wu Jingmin represented the power of the new group. Military counselor represented Emperor Dong's palace. Only when he, the CEO, was present could the power of the new group and the giant group operate smoothly and prepare for the next chaotic battle. The first thing we have to face is the academy. Military counselor's voice was very quiet and calm. In the chaos, his slow voice had a kind of reassuring and trustworthy power. Your Majesty, what are you going to do about Li Kuangtu? Li Tianlan was silent for a moment. Do we fight to the end? Or can we compromise? I can operate in Yuzhou, but first we have to be mentally prepared. Your decision means different results. The current situation is that our conflict with the academies has caused the current chaos. This is not a good thing, but it is not a bad thing either. At least to a certain extent, it shows that the initiative is in our hands, not in the hands of the academies. If we fight to the end, the first thing we have to face is the full attack of the academies. In this position, Li Huaqing can't be ignored. Once we fall into a disadvantageous position, other forces who don't want the new group to appear will undoubtedly attack us together. It's hard for us to resist, but once we do, our gains will be far beyond expectations. It's risky to fight to the end, but the benefits are also great. If we compromise, we can make full use of the initiative in our hands. When to compromise and when to hand Li Kuangtu over to the parliament, these are completely up to us. We can even use this to exchange something with the academies. Before the election, our preparation will be more leisurely. At present, compromise is a relatively rational choice. It's less risky and very safe. Military counselor's voice was clear and definite. So you prefer me to let him go? Li Tianlan asked. Military counselor seemed to think about the emotion in Li Tianlan's tone and finally said cautiously, "Everything is up to your Majesty. I'm in charge." Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes slightly and didn't speak for a while. He was indeed hesitant about how to deal with Li Kuangtu. Li Kuangtu's hostility to him was extremely obvious, but perhaps it was because of some fixed but later broken understanding of Li Kuangtu since childhood, or because of Dongqing Rushi, or because of the sword Li Kuangtu lent him in Reki City. It was because of the sword that Li Kuangtu had lent him in Reki City, or something else that he couldn't tell himself. Therefore, even though Li Tianlan now had the strength above Li Kuangtu, he didn't want to kill him very much. Jiang Shangyu might have also seen this. So he forcibly took Gu Xingyun away and left Li Kuangtu. At that time, Li Tianlan could have killed Li Kuangtu countless times in an instant, but in the end, he chose to take him back to Emperor Dong's palace. From the perspective of Emperor Dong's palace, keeping Li Kuangtu here and waiting for the situation to stabilize, Li Tianlan could already get up and go to Heaven Capital in Tianan and use Li Kuangtu as a bargaining chip to take over the entire purgatory of Heaven Capital. There was a saying in ancient times that one could order the vassals by holding the emperor by force. It was not accurate to use it here. Li Kuangtu was not the emperor, but the meaning was not much different. As long as he controlled Li Kuangtu, taking over the purgatory of Heaven Capital would be a matter of time. Those who were inclined to him no longer had to hesitate and would willingly join Emperor Dong's palace. Even those who were loyal to Li Kuangtu, such as Dawn, Daybreak, and Phoenix, would join because Li Kuangtu was under the control of Emperor Dong's palace and become the sword of Emperor Dong's palace. Situ Zhongyue's occasional trance would not appear again. The relationship between Sai City and Mount Shu would gradually ease. Li Shi didn't have to recall the past. Keeping Li Kuangtu would be an explanation to Dongqing Rushi, her grandfather, and the Li family. As long as Emperor Dong controlled Li Kuangtu, Emperor Dong's palace could get a lot of things. From the perspective of Emperor Dong's palace, the parliament would also give him generous compensation if he handed over Li Kuangtu. Dongqing Wudi brought Li Huaqing's bargaining chip. In the communication with Li Huaqing not long ago, he also explained it calmly. Beijiang was undoubtedly a piece of fat meat, but Li Huaqing didn't mean to exchange the position of the cabinet. In principle, he's still supported by Qin Qian to go to the cabinet. He could also support Wu Jingmin to serve as a director and deputy prime minister. He would also support Zhou Yuanshan to go to Nanyue. Li Huaqing's original intention was to promote Wu Jingmin's first secretary, Jian Kong, who was now in Xianxia and had a very pleasant cooperation with Zhou Yuanshan and Dongqing Qiuqi, to the parliament of Zhongzhou State and let him take charge of Beijiang. Jian Kong's qualifications were undoubtedly insufficient. Even among dozens of provincial speakers in Zhongzhou State, his qualifications were the least, but his ability was beyond doubt. If Beijiang was handed over to Jian Kong, Li Tianlan would rest assured, and Zhongzhou State would also rest assured. The strategic significance of Beijiang was far more than just a member of parliament. That was the largest province in Zhongzhou State. It could be said to be vast and resourceful, but it could also be said to be sparsely populated. There were too many things that could be done in that land, no matter what could be said or not. If the new group took over Beijiang after the election, they would undoubtedly become one of the top groups in Zhongzhou State. And not only the new group, but also Li Huaqing's concession to the Border Control Corps also meant that as long as Li Tianlan handed over Li Kuangtu, the giant group could also get great benefits. This was the condition that Li Huaqing put forward. And it was certain that this was not all the conditions, but the most tempting one. As long as Li Tianlan was willing to talk about other details, there was absolutely room for discussion. Therefore, in the so-called overall situation of Emperor Dong's palace, it was beneficial to Emperor Dong's palace whether to release him or not. The difference was that if he didn't release him, he would get the purgatory of Heaven Capital, but he would have to resist the pressure from the parliament of Zhongzhou State. And if he released him, he would get a large number of bargaining chips headed by Beijiang, but in the future, he would have to face the joint forces of Li Kuangtu, Gu Xingyun, and Jiang Shangyu. Li Tianlan was not afraid of making enemies. He was not even afraid that Li Kuangtu would enter the supreme realm in the spiritual domain first. He just didn't want to be enemies with Li Kuangtu and the purgatory of Heaven Capital represented by Li Kuangtu. The brand of the Li family on the purgatory of Heaven Capital was so obvious. It could be said that he was indecisive, soft-hearted, or hesitant. Li Tianlan really didn't want to fight against them. That was tantamount to cutting off the beliefs he had grown up with, distorting his life, and making the future more meaningless. And Li Huaqing and the parliament of Zhongzhou State were now undoubtedly forcing him and the Li family represented by Li Kuangtu to go against each other. Li Tianlan held the phone and said after a while, "Let's wait and see. Things have to be done first. Don't be too anxious." Military counselor smiled on the other end of the phone. Now both sides are still at the stage of showing their strength. The second before the real showdown is the time for your majesty to consider. Li Tianlan said, I probably know what Li Huaqing wants to do. Military counselor continued, our intelligence department has received the news. Li Huaqing should want to re-establish the order of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. He has talked with Gu Xingyun and Jiang Shangyu. Li Guangtu is also an indispensable part of his plan. In Li Huaqing's expectation, in the future, the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State will set up several new corps as the core pillars of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. Kunlun Corps, Commander Gu Xingyun, the main force is the current elite of Kunlun City. Heaven Capital Corps, Commander Li Guangtu, the main force is the current elite of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The third one, the source of the news, is a little vague. It should be called the Shadow Legion, Commander Jiang Shangyu. The specific composition of the personnel is unknown. In addition, there is the Snowdance Corps and the Nightmare Corps of Emperor Dong's palace, led by Your Majesty. It seems that the Parliament will also give the special warfare system more power to speak. In short, Li Huaqing is very generous, and it can be seen that he is very sincere. Military counselor's quiet and deep voice kept echoing. Li Tianlan held the phone and did not speak for a long time. You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.